And now I'm just going to finish The Giver with chapters 22 and 23. So something's happening now as the landscape's changing. They're getting out of the areas that have been controlled with climate control and getting rid of all the animals and stuff. So we're in an area now where it's much harder for Jonas to ride. It's bumpy, and eventually he comes across hills. Now he can ride in daylight because there are no planes looking for him. But he's got other challenges. They see streams and they're able to stop and drink. Jonas, by the way, has fallen because of the bumpiness of the road, and he's sprained his ankle, so it's very uncomfortable for him to ride now. And they saw their first waterfall and wildlife. Gabriel, bless him, he looks at the birds and he thinks they're a plane, and then Jonas realizes it's a bird. They haven't seen birds in there aren't any animals as we know in the community. It says all of it was new to him. After a life of sameness and predictability, he was awed by the surprises that lay beyond each curve of the road. So he looks in wonder. He sees wildflowers. He sees leaves, he feels the happiest he's ever felt in his life by seeing wildlife around him. But obviously he's very frightened as well. They've completely run out of food. They try and catch a fish. Eventually they do manage to catch a fish with a net and they eat it raw. They eat berries, but they're absolutely starving. Very, very hard to fall asleep with hunger. He tries to relieve his feeling of hunger by remembering meals, of bringing memories, but it doesn't last long enough, and eventually the hunger comes back. So he thinks back and he says if he had stayed in the community, he would not be. Hang on 1 second, sorry. When the memory glimpses subsided, he was left with a gnawing, painful emptiness. Jonas remembered suddenly and grimly the time in his childhood when he had been chastised for misusing a word. So now he really understands what starving is and why they yell at him for saying the word that he's not allowed to say he's starving. But now he knows he is starving, he realizes also that he's made a choice, that even if he was the wrong one, he's not sure, but if he'd stayed, and this is very important here, he said if he had stayed he would have starved in two other ways. We have different ways of starving, by the way. Starving, there's starving of hunger, but there's being starved of other things that human beings need. So he would have lived a life hungry for feelings, for colour, and for love. And for Gabriel, there's no choice because Gabriel would have been released. He sees now the weather's changing, and he experiences rain, which he's never experienced before. But it's very hard with him and Gabriel because Gabriel's getting cold and wet, and Gabriel's very hungry and cold, and Jonas doesn't know how to protect him. Chapter 23, the final chapter. And Jonas now has a very strong feeling, like a gut feeling of where he's going. He's more and more certain that the destination lay ahead of him. Because he doesn't really know where he's going. He's just going to elsewhere. He's taking a chance because he doesn't know what lies beyond. He says he just follows the road ahead, and he feels that elsewhere is not far away. The weather's getting colder, and Gabriel is shivering, very, very quiet, and he's getting very quiet and very weak. And they eventually see snow. Of course, Jonas knows what snow is because he's been given the experience of being on a sled. And remember, the whole thing with the sled, that's one of the first experiences he has, and this is the last chapter. Again, we talk about things going in a full circle. It's all very sad. I mean, he's really they're really on there. They have no energy and they have no food and they're starving, and they don't know where they're going and there's no one around. And there's just something which is pulling Jonas on. He doesn't even know if he's got the strength to give anymore, and he doesn't know if Gabriel can receive. And then he tries to press his hand into Gabriel's back and to give him sunshine so that Gabriel can warm up a little bit, and it helps for a bit, but then and then it goes. But the moment passed and was followed by an urge, a need, a passionate yearning to share the warmth with one person left for him to love. Okay, so this is the big change that has gone over Jonas. That he has feelings, that he no longer really belongs in the community. And for a time, they're hugging each other, they're feeling the warmth, and then they're back to the snow again. And he's at the point where he could just give up and just lie down and die, but something is pushing him on. And he trudges up to the top of the hill, and then he suddenly begins to feel happy. He began to recall happy times. He remembered his parents and his sister. He remembered his friends Asher and Fiona. He remembered the giver. Memories of joy flooded through him suddenly. So even though the situation is really bad, all of a sudden something is filling Jonas with a good feeling. And he tells Gabriel that we're almost there. This is very interesting. There was something he could keep. It was a memory of his own. This is very interesting that he's finally got to the place where he can actually create his own memories. He's not just getting something from someone else. He has his final strength, and he sees a sled, and he sits on the sled, puts Gabe in front of him, and there's really this description which is very ambiguous. We don't really know whether it's a positive or a negative ending. I'll read it to you, and then we'll talk about it. Jonas felt himself losing consciousness, and with his whole being willed himself to stay upright atop the sled, clutching Gabriel, keeping him safe. The runner sliced through the snow, and the wind whipped up at his face as they sped in a straight line through an incision that seemed to lead to the final destination, the place he had always felt was waiting, the elsewhere that held their future and their past. Okay, so he feels that he's heading towards the elsewhere, but this elsewhere is only based on a feeling. We don't see the elsewhere as readers. He forced his eyes open as they went downward, sliding, and all at once he could see lights and recognized them now. He knew they were shining through the windows of rooms, that they were red, blue, and yellow lights that twinkled from trees in places where families created and kept memories, where they celebrated love. So he can see the houses, and this reminds us of the memory that he was given of family, of everybody having a Christmas celebration, and he's going on this sled faster and faster. And he was aware with certainty and joy that below ahead they were waiting for him, and they were waiting too for the baby. For the first time he heard something that he knew to be music. He heard people singing. Okay, and behind him, across vast distances of space and time from the place he had left, he thought he heard music too. But perhaps it was only an echo. Okay, so he is hearing music, but we don't know, because it could be that he's dying. So it could be a very tragic ending, or it could be a very positive ending. It could be that Jonas ends up in elsewhere and he starts his new life, and him and Gabriel are able to be their own person. It says behind him, across the vast distances of space and time. This is where he also imagines that he's hearing music from the community behind him, that they finally have received the memories, and his ultimate sacrifice, which is a big sacrifice that he made, has made a change in the community. Now that they have the memories, they can start to think for themselves about what they want to do. Remember, guys, that Happy Ever After is not necessarily what books are all about. Really good books, that is. Usually when you're talking about real literature, the main character, the protagonist, he has to achieve, I'm writing protagonist, he has to achieve self-realization, okay? He has to be the person that he is supposed to be. Okay, so, and usually it's through a trial or struggle, through trial or struggle, or both. And Jonas has achieved the self-realization. His realization is that living is living. Living is experiencing pain and love and pleasure and colour and music. And he's also realised something very important, that it's better to die than to live a life where you're emotionally dead. It's something that nobody else in the community realises, except perhaps the giver. This is the most important point of the book. The point of the book is not whether there's a happy ever after or there isn't a happy ever after. We're deliberately left with him on the sled, and if you remember, the memory that he's given, the second memory on the sled, is when he falls over and breaks his leg. So we don't know what is at the end of this sled ride. But the sled ride is very important in itself, because the sled represents that feeling of adrenaline, that feeling of being alive. Okay, and this is what Jonas realizes that is the most important thing, that being alive is more important than being safe. Guys, leave it to your imagination, whether you think that everything's going to be great or everything's going to be terrible. But the main point is that that big change happened with the protagonist, and you'll see this in more books that you read. Thank you very much.